Did Vatican II change Catholic ecclesiology? Stick around to find out. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Reason and Theology. Your host, Michael Lofton. I want to talk about the Second Vatican Council and Catholic ecclesiology. Did the Catholic Church change its teachings on the nature of the Church with the Second Vatican Council, which, of course, happened between 1962 to 1965? It's often perceived by many, both Catholics and non-Catholics, that the Catholic Church changed its ecclesiology. Ecclesiology is just being a fancy word for the study of the church. So here in this context, it means, the Catholic Church changed its understanding of who the Catholic Church is, the very nature of the church, and also its position on Protestants and non-Catholics. I found one document from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith to be very helpful in clarifying the answer here. We often say, let me rephrase that. We often hear people say that the Second Vatican Council was very unclear on some things, that it was ambiguous. Well, you know what? The Catholic Church has done and made many efforts to clarify itself. By the way, somebody's saying they don't have sound, but it looks like it's only on their end. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that it was only on their end and maybe not on mine. It looks like sound is working on my end. So, okay. But we, again, often hear that the Second Vatican Council was very unclear. I'm not touching on the question of whether or not it was ambiguous or intentionally ambiguous. Right now, I'm just saying, well, even if that's true, even if it was unclear on some things, what we have from the Catholic Church since the Second Vatican Council is clarification after clarification after clarification. But for some reason, misinformation still persists. But what I would like to do to help offset that is look at a document from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Now it's known as the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, but at the time in 2007, when this was issued by the congregation, well, the Dicastery, it was called the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. And this is a document issued June 29 of 2007 from the offices of the CDF. And it says, the Supreme Pontiff Benedict XVI, at the audience granted to the undersigned Cardinal Prefect for the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, ratified and confirmed these responses adopted in plenary session of the congregation and ordered their publication. So you do have approbation from the Holy See. So this would be a magisterially authoritative document, and the document is titled Responses to Some Questions Regarding Certain Aspects of the Doctrine of the Church. You got to love some of the the titles that they give for for their documents. What I've noticed from the CDF, especially at this time, is the title tends to be a description of what it was, that they're talking about, more than just a title. It's like the full description is the title. It's kind of a mouthful. So instead of saying, the document known as Responses to Some Questions Regarding Certain Aspects of the Doctrine of the Church, I feel like we should have something that's a little less of a mouthful if we want to reference some of these documents, but that's just my opinion. Okay. It's not very long of a document, but it goes over 5 different questions, and they offer responses to each. So here's the introduction. The Second Vatican Council, with its dogmatic Constitution Lumen Gentium and its decrees on ecumenism and the Oriental churches, has contributed in a decisive way to the renewal of Catholic ecclesiology. The Supreme Pontiffs have also contributed to this renewal by offering their own insights and orientations for practice. Paul VI in his encyclical letter, and John Paul II in his encyclical letter. And by the way, I see y'all in the chat. I've heard Alexander says, I've heard that Father Ripperger claimed Vatican II taught branch theory, but I don't know how he got that. Well, Vatican II certainly did not teach branch theory. It upheld the Orthodox understanding of the Catholic Church. For those of y'all who don't know, branch theory comes from Anglicanism, and it's this notion that, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and the Eastern Orthodox churches, none of those are fully the Catholic Church established by Christ, but they all make up the one Church of Christ. Kind of like if you add them 3 together, you have the one Church of Christ. That is not at all what Catholicism taught. Whether that's what Father Ripperger meant to communicate, I've asked for clarification previously on this show of Father Ripperger and still haven't heard any. Father Ripperger made those comments in a very, like, in passing. So it could be that people have just misunderstood him there, and that's not his position. It could be that he wasn't saying that Vatican II taught branch theory. If that's his position, he's wrong about that. Absolutely wrong. But I don't know. Perhaps we just misunderstood him. Perhaps he could have been more clear there. But here's where I say, you know what? From the traditionalist perspective, if there's a constant accusation against Vatican II and the post-conciliar church of being unclear, and people are constantly saying Pope Francis needs to be more clear, well, here's my challenge to the traditionalists. They also need to be more clear, and they need to clarify themselves. And I frankly think that Father Ripperger needs to clarify himself, because many people understood him to say the Vatican II taught branch theory. Again, it could be that that's not what he was saying. It was a comment that he made in passing. Perhaps he meant something else. I give him the benefit of the doubt there. But I do think that it's incumbent on him to clarify himself there, especially if we are going to criticize Vatican II or the post-conciliar church or Pope Francis for not being clear. Okay. So getting back to it, the consequent duty of theologians to expound with greater clarity the diverse aspects of ecclesiology has resulted in a flowering of writing in this field. In fact, it has become evident that this theme is a most fruitful one, which, however, has also at times required clarification by way of precise definition and correction. For instances, in the Declaration Magisterium Ecclesia, the letter addressed to the bishops of the Catholic Church, and the Declaration in 2000 by Benedict Dominus Jesus, all published by the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. I think it was Ratzinger who was under Dominus Jesus. Yeah. The vastness of the subject matter and the novelty of many of these themes involved continue to provoke theological reflection. Among the many new contributions to the field, some are not immune from erroneous interpretation, which in turn give rise to confusion and doubt. So they're talking about some erroneous interpretations here of the Catholic ecclesiology that gives confusion and doubt to some people. A number of these interpretations have been referred to the attention of the CDF. Given the universality of Catholic doctrine on the church, the congregation wishes to respond to these questions by clarifying the authentic meaning of some ecclesiological expressions used by the magisterium, which are open to misunderstanding and the theological debate. And yeah, I'd have to say that's absolutely spot on. There's a lot of misunderstandings here. Unfortunately, this document did not, clear up those misunderstandings, not on their end. I think they did a good job on their end, but on the end of the average person, a lot of people just haven't done very good research in this area. So on their end, people are still confused. But I think the church has done a good job at clarifying itself. Okay, here's the first question. Did the Second Vatican Council change the doctrine on the church? That's going to be asserted by a lot of people, and not just people outside of the Catholic Church, such as your sedevacantists, but also some people within the Catholic Church make this claim. I've heard this again from many people outside sedevacantism, Eastern Orthodoxy, Protestantism, but unfortunately, I hear it also from people who claim to be part of the Catholic Church. Okay, so does the Second Vatican here's the response. The Second Vatican Council neither changed nor intended to change this doctrine. Rather, it developed, deepened, and more fully explained it. So it's making a distinction between substantially changing a doctrine and developing it. Those are not the same. We can say that, a baby changes over a long period of time into a man. Not substantially, right? There's no substantial change there. It's still a human from the time that it's a baby until the time that it is a fully grown human, such as a fully grown man. It's still a human substantially, and it's also still the same person substantially. It's not like a different person. But what you can say changed are the accidental features, how tall they are, where they're located, their intellectual ability, things like that. We can say, using that illustration, that there have been some developments. There's been some accidental changes to the church in 2000 years. There's never been a substantial change on what the church is and how it understands what the church is. In fact, the church can't change its core of what the church is, neither what it is nor its understanding of what it is. It can't change that. It goes on. This was exactly what John the 23rd said at the beginning of the council. Paul VI affirmed it and commented in the act of promulgating the Constitution. Quote, "There is no better comment to make than to say that this promulgation really changes nothing of the traditional doctrine. What Christ willed, we also will. What was still is. What the church has taught throughout the centuries, we also teach. In simple terms, that which was assumed, it is now explicit, it is now explicit. That which was uncertain is now clarified. That which was meditated upon, discussed, and sometimes argued over is now put together in clear formulation." The bishops repeatedly expressed and fulfilled this intention. And John the 23rd is very clear about that in the opening speech. He's very clear. Number one, what is the primary purpose of Vatican II? He explicitly states to guard the deposit of faith. And then only second to that, to explain it in a way that modern man can understand. So to guard and preserve the deposit of faith, task number one. Task number two, to then explain it in a way that modern man can understand. So it was very clear, not changing the deposit of faith. The deposit remains the same. He's famous for saying in his opening speech, that is John the 23rd, the substance of the faith is one thing, the way in which it's delivered is another. Okay, so that's question number one. Puts to death the claim that somehow the church has changed its teaching on what the church is. That's absolutely not true. Now, number two, second question. What is the meaning of the affirmation that the Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church? You'll often hear this brought up as an example of, here's an example where the church has changed its understanding of what it is. Before we would say the Catholic Church is the church established by Christ, and now we're saying it subsists in, what's going on here? Have we changed our understanding? Here's what it says in response. Christ established here on earth only one church and instituted it as a visible and spiritual community. So it's visible, although it does have spiritual aspects. It is a visible community, and it's only one church. That from its beginning and throughout the centuries has always existed and will always exist, and in which alone are found all of the elements that Christ himself instituted. Listen to that. All of the elements that Christ instituted, what it means to be the Catholic Church, has it been established by Christ, is currently existing, and will always be in the one church. There will never be a time that the Catholic Church will lose one of its essential features. Maybe it's holiness or its unity. There will never be a time, even if schisms happen, even if scandals happen, it never loses its unity, its holiness, and so on. So all of the features that make up the church and determine the church to be what it actually is, those features will always be there. And it goes on, this one church of Christ, which we confess in the creed as one holy, Catholic, and apostolic, this church constituted and organized in this world as a society, subsists in the Catholic Church, governed by the successor of Peter and the bishops in communion with him. So the church that Christ established, that will always preserve its essential features, what it means to be the church, is in the church of St. Peter and his successors and the bishops in communion with him. That's the Catholic Church. Those who are in communion with the Pope. That is the one church of Christ that is established by Jesus, has all of its essential features established by Jesus, and always will have those essential features. And it's the only one who has all those essential features. It's the only one. There's only one, not two, not three, only one. So this is not branch theory. This is the opposite of branch theory. It goes on. In number 8 of the Dogmatic Constitution Lumen Gentium, which I highly recommend everybody reads, subsistence means this perduring historical continuity and the permanence of all the elements established by Christ in the Catholic Church, in which the Church of Christ is concretely found on this earth. It is possible, according to Catholic doctrine, to affirm correctly that the Catholic Church of Christ is present and operative in the churches and ecclesial communities not yet fully in communion with the Catholic Church on account of the elements of sanctification and truth that are in them. So, okay, what's it saying here? It's saying that there are some elements of the one true Church of Christ that can exist in some of these other communities. That's why we recognize the validity of non-Catholic baptisms, for instance. We recognize the ability for non-Catholics to be able to validly baptize. And yet we still say that the Catholic Church is the one true Church of Christ. Because we recognize that some of these non-Catholic communities can have aspects of the Church of Christ, but none of them fully have all of the features established by Christ Jesus. There's only one church that has that. That's the Catholic Church. Nevertheless, the word subsists can only be attributed to the Catholic Church alone, precisely because it refers to the mark of unity that we profess in the symbols of faith. I believe in the one church, and this one church subsists in the Catholic Church. Third question: why was the expression subsists in adopted instead of the word is? You know, the simple word is. Why didn't they just use that? Answer: the use of this expression, which indicates the full identity of the Church of Christ with the Catholic Church, does not change the doctrine on the Church. Rather, it comes from and brings out more clearly the fact that there are numerous elements of sanctification and of truth which are found outside of her structure, but which, as gifts properly belonging to the Church of Christ, impel towards Catholic unity. There are some things that non-Catholics have that are true and good. They're not things that are absent in the Catholic Church. We already possess those things. We already have everything essential for what it means to be the church. So it's not like, you know, the Protestants or the Orthodox have some truth that we lack. Nope, that's branch theory. No, we have all of those things already. It's just that some of those true and good things can exist also outside of the structure of the church. That's, again, why we recognize the validity of baptism of non-Catholics and have for ages. To say otherwise is the heresy of Donatism. You would be a heretic if you deny that. So for those who have reservations of this, you would actually have to be a heretic to deny what the Catholic Church is saying here. You would effectively have to be a Donatist. Okay. It goes on. Fourth question: why does the Second Vatican Council use the term church in reference to the Oriental churches, that is, Eastern churches, separated from full communion with the Catholic Church? This comes up a lot because a lot of people think, oh, well, you know, you guys say that the Eastern Orthodox have valid churches, therefore that somehow is branch theory, or you're saying that there's just no more schism now between Catholics and Orthodox. That does not logically follow. That does not follow. Here's what we mean whenever we speak of the Eastern Orthodox churches having valid churches. Here's what it means. Response: the council wanted to adopt the traditional use of the term because these churches, although separated, notice that they are still separated, have true sacraments, and above all, because of the apostolic succession, the priesthood, and the Eucharist, by means of which they remain linked to us by very close bonds, but still imperfect because they're still separated. They merit the title of particular or local churches and are called sister churches of the particular Catholic churches. So sister church, valid church, we're not saying that the Eastern Orthodox have all of the essential features of what it means to be Catholic. No, they don't, because they still lack the papacy. They have basically everything else, though, except that one essential feature. Which is why it's still the case that they remain separated from us. But that being said, we can still say that they're valid local churches. There's a difference between the universal church, the Catholic Church as a whole, on the universal level, In order to be part of that, you have to be in communion with the Bishop of Rome. But just because somebody's not in communion with the Bishop of Rome doesn't mean that they're not a local church at all. You could have local churches. If you have a valid bishop, even if he's separated from the Pope, you have a valid local church. It's just that local church is broken off from the universal communion. So there's still a separation. There's still a schism there. That bishop needs to enter into communion with Catholic Church. He needs to enter into union with Rome. But since he is a valid bishop and he has the ability to confect the sacraments, you then have all 7 sacraments present in that local territory. Therefore, it's a valid local church. And in that sense, we can call them sister churches, but sister churches of a particular church. Okay, it is through, it goes on to say, it is through the celebration of the Eucharist of the Lord in each of these churches that the Church of God is built up and grows in stature. And so it's because of that validity of the Eucharist, and of course because of the bishop, that you have a valid local church there. But don't stop there. Don't think that that's the end of the story. No, they still need to preserve Catholic unity if they want to have, if they want to be valid, considered on the universal level, if you will, if they want to be part of the one church established by Christ universally. However, since communion with the Catholic Church, the visible head of which is the Bishop of Rome and the successor of Peter, is not some external complement to a particular church, but rather one of its internal constitutive principles, these venerable Christian communities lack something in their condition as particular churches. It's not saying that, everything that it means to be a particular church is somehow present in Eastern Orthodoxy. We can say one thing is missing. That is preservation of communion with the Bishop of Rome. That's native to what it means to be a particular church. So if you lack that, you do still lack something even on the local level. That's why we can't say that there still isn't a schism. That's why we can't say, oh, the schism is over. No, I hear this all the time. No, the lifting of the excommunications. The lifting of the excommunications, and what was it? 1964, I believe, is when it was. Paul VI did that. That doesn't still mean that there isn't a schism. It just means that the cardinal that was excommunicated by Constantinople, that was reversed. And then the Patriarch of Constantinople on our end, that was reversed, if it was ever valid to begin with. And it probably wasn't, because the Pope was dead whenever the cardinal issued it. So the lifting of the excommunications of 1054 was very, very limited in nature and doesn't really do anything to undo the schism, broadly speaking. It helps. It's a good gesture. It's good symbolically. But there's still a schism there, unfortunately. And unfortunately, the Orthodox still lack something on the particular level. And that's why whenever you hear a Catholic say, what's wrong with being a Catholic and then just leaving the Catholic Church to go Eastern Orthodox? What's wrong? They're valid local churches. Yeah, they're valid local churches, but they lack something essential to what Christ established and intended and wills for his church. So what you're saying is, when I go and I leave to Eastern Orthodoxy, you're deliberately leaving something that Christ wills for you to preserve. That sounds like disobedience. It's not a good thing. Now, I'm not imputing culpability on any particular individual. There could always be ignorance and stuff like that. So maybe if a person does this, I'm not necessarily saying that they're going to hell or have committed a mortal sin. It's possible for a person to commit a schismatic act and yet still not be fully aware that that was a schismatic act, right? There could be a mitigation of culpability there. So I'm not condemning any one particular individual or anybody who does this, but what I am saying is the act itself is condemned. The act itself should not be carried out. I'm not making a judgment on any particular individual. But this is why I'm saying the act itself is wrong. It's wrong to leave from Catholicism to Eastern Orthodoxy because of this. It's to say, I'm leaving to a church that lacks an essential feature that Christ wills for me to preserve and maintain and be in communion with. Whether you realize it or not, that's to say I'm being disobedient to Jesus. It goes on the one hand, on the other hand, because of the division between Christians, the fullness of universality, which is proper to the church, governed by the successor of St. Peter and the bishops in communion with him, is not fully realized in history. Why do it goes on the fifth question, why do the texts of the council and those of the magisterium, since the council not use and by the way, let me clarify with this, that doesn't mean that the Catholic Church has lost anything, or what Christ wills for the one true church isn't there fully in the Catholic Church. That's not what it's saying. But what it is saying is all of these other local churches, it's against the will of Christ for them to be separated from the bishop of Rome. That's not okay with Jesus. Basically, it's against his will. So his will for those local churches to be in communion with the Bishop of Rome right now, they are going against his will, whether they realize it or not. Not speaking of culpability, but just saying that it is what it is. Again, why do the texts of the council and those of the magisterium, since the council, not use the title of church with regard to those Christian communities born out of the Reformation of the 16th century? So why is it that we can call Eastern Orthodox local churches and we can use the term church for them, but we won't do that for Protestants? We'll call them separated brethren, ecclesiastical communities. Why the distinction here? Response: according to the Catholic doctrine, these communities do not enjoy apostolic succession and the sacrament of orders. They don't have apostolic succession, so they don't have all of the sacraments, and are therefore deprived of a constitutive element of the church. These ecclesial communities, which specifically because of the absence of the sacramental priesthood, that is, they don't have the priesthood, the vast majority of them don't. There might be some very rare exceptions of a Protestant group that has still apostolic succession, but it's incredibly rare. So it's just speaking general here. Have not preserved the genuine and integral substance of the Eucharistic ministry or mystery, and cannot therefore, according to the Catholic Church, be called churches in the proper sense, because again, they lack something essential there for the Eucharist. And that's it. I mean, it's a pretty short document, but it effectively clarifies a lot of misunderstandings. By the way, Dominus Iesus, great document. And perhaps I can do a whole show talking about Dominus Iesus. Perhaps we can review that one. That one's a little bit of a longer document than what we just read here. So it will certainly have to be at a later time. But if y'all have interest in me reviewing Dominus Iesus, I'd love to. It's on the unicity and salvific universality of Jesus Christ in the church. I think that would be a helpful document to go through to kind of undo some of the misunderstandings. Now, I'll briefly stick around here for just a few questions related to this topic. Go ahead and put them in the chat right now. Make sure to tag me at Reason in Theology, and I'll do my best to engage them for a few minutes here. Let me take a look at the chat and see if there already is anything. Do you have any videos with Dr. Declue? His area of focus is ecclesiology. I did do a show a while back with Dr. Declue and Dr. Minard. So that should still be here on YouTube. Yeah, it should still be available. Let me look and see what the video is called. Let's see. Okay, I actually did a second one with him. I remember that. Divine Revelation and the Thought of Benedict is one. And then the second one is Dr. Minard and Dr. Declue, discussion on the Nouvelle Theology. Let's see. Did I do anything else? No, that was it. Okay. Is there a more accurate English translation of Vatican II available? Yeah, I know what you're talking about. You're probably referring to Flannery's translation. That's probably not the best. Let me get back to you on a good one on that one. I'll have to see. I do tend to just use Flannery if I'm looking at the English. But I know that some people do have some concerns there. Let's see what else we got. Well, I see Matthew recommending Flannery. I thought that actually there were some concerns with some of the translation here and there, but On the whole, I tend to use it and haven't found it, you know, too alarming or anything like that. I don't think there's going to be anything in there like substantially against the Catholic faith or something. Let's see what else we got. Looking through the chat. The Catholic Church is the only church that can trace its roots back to the apostles. That would be false. We could still say that the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Oriental Orthodox churches have apostolic succession. So they too can trace their origin to the apostles. The problem is they haven't preserved an essential feature of what it means to be the church, and that is preserving communion with the successor of St. Peter, that is the Bishop of Rome. What else we got? Let's see. What Vatican II translation does Word on Fire? I'd have to look, actually. I forget offhand. It's been a little while since I looked at the preface. I'd have to go and look. It's a good question. I enjoyed it. The one book that Vatican II, that Word on Fire put out by Vatican II. In fact, I reviewed it here on the show. It goes over with commentary the 4 major documents, and of course, it includes the text as well. Highly recommended. What are your thoughts on remaining Catholic and believing that Paul VI was the worst pope in history? You know, I used to share that sentiment that he was one of the worst popes in history because I used to have a very, very strong hatred towards Vatican II because I thought that, you know, Vatican II is just responsible for all the chaos in the church, and it took a long time to work through a lot of those misunderstandings. That's not to say that I think Vatican II is the greatest council ever. Hardly. I think that the Council of Trent was much more effective than Vatican II seems to have been. Also, I appreciate the style of Vatican II more than I appreciate the style of, I appreciate the style of Trent more than I appreciate the style of Vatican II. I get what Vatican II was trying to do insofar as it was trying to communicate to the average person using non-technical language. I totally get that, but I think that the majority of the world just kind of ignored the documents. So maybe moving forward with other councils, perhaps we should reconsider that. Perhaps we should have some, you know, specific documents, right? Documents with specific language, technical theological language, and maybe separate documents explaining those documents written for modern man. In fact, I think that was one of the, if I'm not mistaken, I think that was actually proposed for Vatican II, if I recall correctly. But what do I think of that? That he's like the worst pope in history? No, I think that some things could have been done better. I wouldn't say he's the worst pope in history. I'm not a major fan of any of the pontificates in the post-conciliar era, not because I think that somehow the popes themselves were bad or evil or mean or, you know, trying to harm souls, or no, but I do think that in the post-conciliar era we could do better with church discipline, and I'm not so sure that any of the popes in the post-conciliar church have done a great job with that. So I'm not a huge fan of any of them, and I won't be until there's more discipline on part of the hierarchy, especially the Bishop of Rome. There needs to be more shepherding and more discipline. And again, I understand some of the reasons why there hasn't been, but I think that we've seen, you know what, that failed. We need to get back to the real medicine of mercy, which is excommunication. I'm not saying excommunication is first resort, but I think that's the real medicine of mercy according to sacred scripture. But okay. Yeah, so I think that that's kind of exaggerated, that he's the worst pope in history. Yeah. Let's see what else we got. Rome should just republish Satis Cognitum. I don't think that'll happen anytime soon. Maybe I can review that document. That one's a little bit longer too, so that would probably be like a 2 or 3 part show. Um, let's see. I'm trying to reconcile how someone could say he's the worst pope and still remain Catholic. Well, because he's canonized. Well, number one, some of the people who take the position that he's the worst pope in history reject papal canonizations and say that they're not infallible. So they would say that they reject that Paul VI is a saint. I reject that position and say that I go with the theologians and the consensus of the theologians, and that is that papal canonizations are infallible. Um, and I think it's a very harmful position to adopt to say otherwise. Now, could a person say a person could be a saint and yet have failed in their pontificate? You could still say that, right? I mean, it's one thing to say, I think this person is personally holy and they're a saint. And on the other hand, I also think that they were a disaster in their pontificate. Those things are not mutually exclusive. It's possible for a person to personally be holy, but just not good at managing the church. But I'm just not conceding the point that that's the case here. Let's see. I remember reading this copy of Vatican II with its commentary being pretty sad and how incredibly enthusiastic and optimistic for the future of the church the writers are in their intros and commentary. Yeah, if you look at the Second Vatican Council at that time, there was an overly optimistic view among the vast majority of the bishops. They had an overly optimistic view of how people would receive the council and an overly optimistic view of mankind. And wasn't it Ratzinger who criticized that and said this underestimated original sin? And I think, yeah, that's right. And it's a little odd that they just overestimated. I'm not saying I would have been any better if I were at that time. I imagine I would have seen things the way that most people saw things, right? But 2020 is hindsight. We look back at it and we think, what in the world were you thinking? And then we also ask the question, didn't you just have 2 world wars? Didn't you just have the Holocaust? How can you be so overly optimistic? The Cuban Missile Crisis was going on at this time. It's just like, really? I don't know. Maybe it was wishful thinking. They were hoping things would get better so that they don't go back to the way things were with 2 world wars. That could be the case, but again, 2020 is hindsight. Yeah, people didn't receive the council very well. You know, I think we were overly optimistic. Roundtable says the CDF even pretty much said canonizations are infallible in a non-magisterial document. It did. You're referring to the CDF's concluding commentary. Commentary on the concluding paragraphs of the Professio Fidei. And unfortunately, for better or worse, some might argue for better, some might argue for worse, it wasn't promulgated by the magisterium. So it's a very important document, but it's not binding on anyone's consciences. However, I would still say that the proposition that papal canonizations are infallible, I think that there's still no room for disagreement there because of the consensus of theologians. Let's see. Where's the new Pentecost? Yeah. Wasn't it let me look it up. Wasn't it the 20-year anniversary of Vatican II where they were saying, yeah, we're still waiting on that new Pentecost? Let's see. Okay. It was actually critical of Vatican II. I know I reviewed the document once on the show. Let's see. I'm trying to find the document. Help me out here, y'all. Wasn't it 20-year anniversary. I think it was a synod on Vatican II. Synod of Bishops on Vatican II. Final report of the 85 Extraordinary Synod. I think that's it. Let me find it. It's been so long since I've looked at it. Yeah, here it is. So the new Pentecost, right? We're gonna get a new Pentecost after Vatican II. Well, we're still waiting on that one. Here it is. The final report of the 1985 Extraordinary Synod. The Church in the Word of God celebrates the mysteries of Christ for the salvation of the world. Second Extraordinary Synod, the final report, 1985. I know I reviewed this previously on the show. I actually found it to be a rather helpful document with some pretty frank commentary on the Second Vatican Council. But here it is, last paragraph. Finally, may there come in our day that new Pentecost of which John the 23rd had already spoken, and which we, with all of the faithful, await from the Holy Spirit. Yeah, they're like, yeah, that whole new Pentecost thing. Yeah, we're still waiting on that. At least they're honest, right? At least they're honest here. I appreciated the honesty. Let's see. Okay, I think you're right. It's easy for us to look now and see what it should have been. Yeah, 2020 is hindsight. Would any of us have been better if we were alive at the time of the Second Vatican Council? Probably not. Probably not. We would have been just as enthusiastic as the Council Fathers were for reform. We would have been just as enthusiastic as they were, most likely. But again, having seen, how this was received and its implementation and stuff like that, we see a whole lot of room for improvement. But they could not have foreseen that at the time. I think that it's something for us to learn from moving forward. If we have another ecumenical council, I say if, I'm sure we will, but I question the prudence of how we could go about doing it. Because the problem with having another ecumenical council at this point is you would have the problem of the real council versus the council of the media that we had back in Vatican II. You would have that problem on steroids. With media the way it is today, can you imagine all of the Synod Fathers who are present, 1 million people on Twitter saying, hey, this is what this Synod Father said, and he said this, and he said that? There would be just massive confusion everywhere. So I don't even know, unless the whole thing is secret until the whole thing is promulgated. I don't even know how we could have beneficially an ecumenical council with social media the way it is right now, with how irresponsible we are in communicating misinformation. Speaking of which, I'm going to do another show, perhaps later on today, on just such an instance where we're being irresponsible and presenting misinformation, us Catholics. No surprise there, right? Is the phrase subsists and actually deeper than is? Yes, because it still preserves the meaning of is. It still preserves that, and it adds an extra layer of, we're also saying that there are some truths of the Catholic Church and some good things that belong to the Catholic Church that exist outside of its formal structure. But those good, true things impel towards Catholic unity, not away from Catholicism. Okay, well, I think that's going to do it, y'all. I'll probably be back later on today for another video, but wanted to sneak this one in there. Hopefully this was helpful. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button, and especially hit that subscribe button. Please help me grow this channel. I really would appreciate it. I know half of y'all who watch the show are not subscribed to this channel. 50% or more of my audience, just kind of depends on the month, but roughly 50% of my audience are not subscribed. And that's been the case since the inception of this channel. So please hit that subscribe button. Help me grow this channel so I can communicate to a larger audience information that people need to hear, because there's so much confusion out there, and I'm making a deliberate attempt and effort to fight against that, to cut through the confusion, to offer some clarity, to offer criticism where it needs to be offered, however, to offer also clarity when there's confusion. And also to bring peace to people who are very troubled in their soul and feel like, what is going on in the church today? You know, I want to try to help bring peace to these people so that they don't reach despair and leave the Catholic Church, or worse, say, I'm not even going to join the Catholic Church because of all of this stuff that, Catholics are saying is going on in the Catholic Church. So again, hit that like button, and especially the subscribe button. Hit the bell for notifications so you know when I go live. And lastly, if you also want to, beyond just hitting the subscribe button, help this channel grow, visit me, patreon.com/reason and theology. You're going to get access to extra content there. But again, it's going to enable me to grow the channel, because this is my primary means of providing for my family. And if you support me on Patreon, it allows me to continue to do these videos here on YouTube for free, to make available to people who are troubled in their soul and need some guidance. So again, consider supporting me there if you don't mind. Again, patreon.com/reason and theology. All right, that's going to do it, y'all. Appreciate y'all tuning in. See you later. God bless. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button. God bless.
Is it possible that ancient aliens created other ancient aliens? Ancient alien theorists say yes. But then, is it also possible that ancient aliens created the ancient alien theorists? And are the ancient aliens and ancient alien theorists led by the Vatican, headed by the Pope? Ancient alien theorists and certain unnamed Catholic YouTubers say yes.
Tired of Catholic shows that peddle conspiracy theories that sound like something out of an Ancient Aliens episode? Check out Reason and Theology for a more reasonable take.
If you're looking to buy or sell a home, office, or any kind of property anywhere in the world, you're going to want to call Real Estate for Life, and they're going to connect you with a Catholic agent. Now, that agent will donate a portion of their commission upon sale, and Real Estate for Life will donate 75% of that gift to a pro-life organization at no cost to you. Call Real Estate for Life at 1-877-LIFE-US1 or text them 248-431-1440. If you care about the pro-life cause, call them now.